Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome everyone. Today we're going to be talking about An Ice Cold Mother Part 1. Today we're going to be talking about Shonda Vander Ark.
To you. Happy birthday to you. Oh my gosh, it's Preston Plays.
Now if you were watching that video, it would seem like a regular birthday party. And if you're thinking to yourself that the woman looks vaguely familiar, you had probably seen her at some point within the last 2 years. And that woman, of course, would be, at the time, 44-year-old Shonda Vander Ark. And she would be known around the world for her questionable parenting methods and the treatment of her children. More specifically, the treatment of her autistic son, 15-year-old Timothy Ferguson. And the child that she would be singing happy birthday to would be, at that time, 19-year-old Paul Ferguson, who would be greatly involved in this story as well. You see, Shonda Vander Ark would give her son Timothy Ferguson subject to one of the most unimaginable forms of abuse I've ever read about in my entire life. I don't think I've ever read about any type of abuse in my life that would be as horrible and heinous and unforgivable and deplorable as what Shonda Vander Ark would put her son Timothy through. And Shonda Vander Ark would not be alone. Not only herself would abuse Timothy, but she would actually recruit her son Paul Ferguson to help abuse Timothy Ferguson. So before we continue with our story, I just want to make a quick disclaimer that if you are sensitive to abuse, child abuse, and just are very easily triggered by these things, I really urge you, viewer discretion is advised, because as I said before, this is probably one of the most horrid acts of crimes against children that I have ever heard about. So viewer discretion is greatly advised. Our story begins in the town of Huntsville, Alabama, where Shonda Vander Ark would be born on September 15, 1979. She would be born to her mother Mildred and her father, which is unknown. And she would also have 2 other siblings. We don't know much about the third sibling, not much is said, but the only sibling that we do know about would be her sister Paige. Now, the only thing that we do know about Shonda's father is from a very early age, when Shonda was young, she was not only physically, but she was also sexually abused by her own father. And by the time that Shonda was 2 years old, Mildred had had enough, and she would file for divorce and leave their father. After the divorce, Mildred would retain custody of Paige and Shonda. But when Shonda was 6 years old, she would actually lose custody of her children. And this is where the story really gets crazy, as when Shonda was 6 years old, her mother Mildred would put a hit out on her own mother. And it is said that she would pay this hitman $25,000 so that she could collect her mother's $2 million inheritance. Now, fortunately, they would actually catch her before the hit could be carried out, and she would be investigated and eventually sent to prison for this. And when this would happen, Paige and Shonda would immediately be sent to foster care, and they would actually be in the foster care system from the moment that Shonda was 6 to 9 years old. And I really wish that this is where Shonda gets a better chance at life, but unfortunately for Shonda, it just got worse from here on out. And no, I'm not making excuses for Shonda Vander Ark, because what she inevitably did later on in life makes her a monster. She is truly an evil woman, but when you look at everything that she experienced in life, it kind of gives you an idea. more or less understand why she became so evil. And what's even more creepy is just the significance of the treatment that she experienced in foster care would have a lot to do later on in life in her treatment with her son Timothy. It's said from the time that she was in foster care from 6 to 9 that Shonda was beaten every single day with either clothes hangers or ping pong paddles. It is also said that she was starved on a daily basis and was forced to take ice baths. Again, all of this plays a major role later on down the road. Mildred would eventually get out of prison and she would attain custody of Paige and Shonda. And by this time she had already remarried, and let's just say this guy was a real special snowflake. And as you'll soon find out, he definitely won't be winning any Father of the Year awards, let's just put it that way. Tragically, sometime in Shonda's childhood, not really said when or how old she was, but her mother Mildred would actually pass away. And because she was married to this stepfather, he would actually have full custody of Shonda and Paige. And when Shonda's mother Mildred would pass away, this is where, as her stepfather would call it, they would enter a sexual relationship, which I think is just rather disgusting that he would refer to it as him abusing the child that he was raising and having sex with, and he would refer to it as a sexual relationship. And this is in part why I said Shonda really did not have the best life growing up, and by the time that she was 16, she had already faced so much abuse in her lifetime. She was physically and sexually abused by the time she was 2 years old. And the abuse did not stop when she went into foster care. And then when her mother attained custody of her back, would shortly pass away. And she would, even though she would not be physically abused, she would still be sexually abused every single day. And again, this would carry on to Shonda's life later on down the road. It would just have serious ramifications as she got older. Even though we don't really know what age would start the sexual abuse, what we do know, however, is almost immediately when the stepfather of Shonda would start sexually abusing her, he would immediately put her on birth control. And he would, quote, do this so they could continue having a sexual relationship. Now, I'm not sure if her sister Paige was victim to any of this kind of abuse. Nothing like that was ever said by her sister Paige, but one thing was said about her sister Paige. Her sister Paige would actually recall and define Shonda as a self-centered, sociopathic, short-tempered person. And considering her sister probably knew the amount of abuse that Shonda went through, may seem kind of judgmental, but you'll soon understand why. When the girls were teenagers, it said that Paige would get into a relationship with a boy at school, and she would actually get pregnant from this relationship. And it said that Shonda would be completely livid that her sister had gotten pregnant. Not that because she had gotten pregnant, but she had gotten pregnant before Shonda. Because Shonda was planning to actually get pregnant by her stepfather. And her way of responding to this is she would punch her sister in the stomach until she would miscarry the child. And a few years later, Paige would get pregnant again. And it said that Shonda would just act in the same way, and she would try to violently punch her in the stomach so she would miscarry. But the second time, she would actually fight her sister off, and she would cut all ties from Shonda and have a child, and hasn't spoken to her sister since then. And honestly, who would really blame her?